Hey, what is going on, everybody? This is the Dave Bullis Podcast. Before I get to today's episode, I just want to say I'm sorry for the lack of uploads. I work a beyond full-time day job, and it's just getting harder and harder to find a time to sit down and record an episode, to edit it, and then release it, and then you got to keep promoting it. So I have some episodes stored. It's just about finding time to actually release them. So, the podcast isn't ending. I know I've been getting a couple of messages. Like, people are like, what happened? It used to be like every Sunday. It's just gotten way, way too crazy. And I'm hoping to get back to a more regular schedule. But on a good note, at least we have some new episodes. I'm going to link everything that, again, we talk about in this episode at davebullis.com. I also have a ton of links which you can use to support the podcast. I get up every day at 4 a.m. to start working, and I usually get home around like 5. And so I only have a very small window to actually start editing. So if you use the links at davebullis.com or wherever you're finding this podcast, and you use those links, it helps me out a lot. And there's a lot of links on there. There's eBay links. It's an affiliate link. It's an Amazon affiliate link. There's Acorns, which helps you invest your spare change. And even if you sign up using my link, they'll not only give you $5, but you also will get an oak tree planted in because of you, in your name or in your honor. But they will plant an oak tree for you. So it's a ton of great links in that, and it also is helps you out, and it also supports the podcast. And if you do use any of my links, please let me know. I really truly appreciate it, and I want to be able to thank you personally. And again, thanks to everyone who keeps using those links in the show notes. They truly help out. On this week's episode of the podcast, I have two Detroit filmmakers. They're both documentary filmmakers. They did the small business, big business thing, and now they're here with a documentary called The Pretender, which is actually showing this weekend. That's this weekend in the October of 2018. At the FirstGlance Film Festival. There's links in the show notes. I know I keep talking about the show notes, but it is where it is, because it's just easier to have everything in one place. And again, that's at davebullis.com. But I want to say shout out to Bill Ostrov and the FirstGlance Film Festival. They are phenomenal, and it's just a great festival, so I urge everyone to check it out. And we're going to be talking about the film that that obviously two filmmakers that came on to discuss, called The Pretender. It's a movie about a person named Mike Kunda who has an obsession with Rocky, and he's the #1 Rocky fan, and it's kind of like, where does Mike end and Rocky begin, or maybe that's vice versa. It's a documentary that I've heard great things about, and I'm really, really glad we could have them on. So without further ado, this is episode 225 with guests Jim Toscano and Danny Gianino.
You're listening to the Dave Bullis Podcast.
Danny and I are in Detroit here, and we started, because we're in Detroit, working on a lot of automotive-related projects for social media, television, commercials, that sort of thing. And this was our first and biggest passion project, was working on The Pretender.
So, being from Detroit, is there a pretty big film market or industry in there for independent films?
Not really. I think that there's a big production community based on the automotive manufacturers. So there's a lot of automotive work, and that's where most of the industry is. But I think, people have passion projects. A lot of them are usually about Detroit almost.
Yeah.
So ours was kind of I felt like we were a little bit alone working on a movie a documentary that's based in Philly. So, there's not a huge documentary community here.
It was interesting because a couple years ago, I actually met she was a former FBI agent, and she actually came to Philly to do this seminar about, how to do real effects in movies and stuff. And she was actually from Detroit, and she was mentioning how she was trying to get the film tax credits either upped or back into the city itself, so more people would film there, because she said there were so many cool locations that you could film at, but most people didn't know about them, outside of Detroit.
Yeah, about 5 years ago, I'd say there was a great tax incentive here for filming, and they cut it a few years ago, and since then, pretty much all the production has left the state, really, which is unfortunate because there was a pretty good community that was forming, and a lot of people were getting like on the job training, basically. So it was kind of a cool opportunity while it was here.
Yeah, and that's kind of what happened here in Philly. There is a tax credit in Pennsylvania, but it all goes towards Pittsburgh, just because it's cheaper to actually the union fees and the taxes are cheaper in Pittsburgh.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Rocky still makes his way to Philly, though.
I think it's because I think if they made a Rocky movie and it wasn't in Philly, I think Sylvester Stallone would know it would just be so disingenuous and so cold,
I could there'd probably be riots at the steps over there in Philly.
Well, the city's been rebuilt after the Super Bowl win, so now Philly's starting to get back up on its feet now.
I could see that. That's funny.
But just making films in Detroit. You mentioned that it's a lot about the automotive industry. So is it like a lot of, in your experience, is it a lot of like stuff about filming for like Ford and some of the bigger automotive plants? Is it sort of like a documentary about the history of companies like that?
It's been like we did a lot of work for GM and some Ford and a lot of Chrysler work, and there is like documentary style videos or projects that we've done for them, and it really runs the gamut, but it all seems to come back to automotive here for the most part. But and we also did a documentary for Detroit Public Television, like the local PBS station, about Detroit architecture and some of the architects that came up here in Detroit. So it was a nice project to do.
So that's pretty cool. So when you started actually making these documentary films, is that something you wanted to cover? Like you wanted to actually just cover your town? Is it because you had like connections or at the right time at the right place? You know what I mean? Like you kind of knew somebody, or and you could hey, I could shoot here, or did you kind of like have an idea and kind of go in that way?
For the architecture doc, actually, we knew somebody at PBS, and they were looking for a company to take it on. And she approached us, and we just kind of took it as kind of something that we could do to keep ourselves making films, And it was a totally new subject matter, which was kind of cool, too, because we learned a lot. And it was a good experience.
So when you started actually starting out, making all this, when was the the kind of like the light bulb that went off that this is something you really wanted to start pursuing even more?
I think working on The Pretender is what really got us going, got us motivated to do more of it. I mean, it's in the subject matter, and we found ourselves like pouring our heart out into the shoots and mostly the edit. I mean, it was cool to really have it. It sounds like such a light premise, like a guy that acts like Rocky and is a super fan, but dealing with someone's personal life and having their story in our hands was like really made us like think about every single edit and and how people perceived it, and because it was the longest piece that we worked on, it's an hour long, just to keep the energy of it up and the interest for the viewers in it. There was just a lot that we learned and loved about making The Pretender that really got us hooked and got us hungry. We actually did The Pretender first, got it done, and as soon as it was finished, we started the architecture doc. So it was great. We wrote that.
Yeah, and I think another thing that was cool about it was it provided like a break from the corporate industry stuff that we were working on, and it was really refreshing to not have any constraints that, we were basically like creating everything ourselves, and, we weren't answering to a client, and we were just trying to make like the best thing we could, and that was really, I think that kept us going. Like it helped not only like become better filmmakers, but become better in the industry that we're in.
So when you say, corporate, documentaries or corporate videos, did you work for like a single corporation, or were you like, kind of going to different corporations and they would kind of tell you, what you wanted, or I'm sorry, what they wanted, and then you would kind of make something off of that?
Yeah, that's exactly pretty much the process. They'll have a concept that they'll present to us, and we kind of put our spin on it or our point of view into it. And, kind of give them back our treatment of it. And then we kind of, collaborate with basically the advertising agencies and the auto manufacturers to kind of collaborate and come up with something that, we like and we're proud of, the agency likes, and, the client also likes. So, and we have to make sure it's all legal.
Right.
Everyone's wearing their seatbelt.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes it's, when you put your heart out into like this video and maybe it kind of goes in, you find like it goes into like a emotional direction or something like that, and then you could show it to the client and they could just be like, well, actually, I think we should just cut this in half and go to the logo, So that's where like working on The Pretender was a lot of fun, because we really got to
express ourselves.
Yeah.
And that's also like part of the weird part of it, like I've said this before, is like, we're used to working on projects where someone requested it and hired us, but sometimes they would hit us in the middle of this editing The Pretender, like, no one asked for this. How do we know anyone wants this? No one knows we're working on this. So it was like freeing, but also sort of weird, What are we doing here? I mean, because we spent a lot of time on it, a lot of days in the edit suite. So it was kind of, scary sometimes because no one asked for it. So
yeah. And in the beginning, we didn't even really know if we had anything.
Yeah.
So,
but now we do.
As we talk about corporate videos, I've had a couple of guests on who used to do that for a living as well. Some still do, some kind of dropped out of it, and I just wanted to get your take on it. Do you ever go into a meeting with a client and they would say something like, well, why would I hire you when I could get my kid to do it with his iPhone? Have you experienced that?
No, not really. I mean, no, we haven't. I mean, because I think we offer like a level of quality and creativity that we're not really on that. Luckily, it hasn't happened, I guess.
And I guess like we do, maybe a really like a small business might have that view where a lot of like the auto manufacturers, have these ad agencies that are constantly working with video companies, and so there's, we're not like doing video for like like the playing card shop down the street or whatever,
What?
I don't know. I was gonna say magic store. That you did.
Yeah.
Store, so.
No, I think like luckily no, it doesn't really come up. I think like I said, I think there's like a level of quality and professionalism, and like with a lot of our clients, you need experience working with those clients because they are a big client, and there's different ways to communicate with them, and I don't. Luckily in our industry, it's still not that easy. You still need production support and a touch of quality.
Yeah, because I mean, whenever somebody brings that up, like for instance, I have a friend who runs a social media agency, and he goes in there, and some people would say to him like, "Hey, I could have my kid do this," and he would say, and rightfully so, he would say, well, your kid's not selling business to customer or business to business. He's like, your kid's going in there and, taking photos of himself shirtless in the mirror, or something like he's not trying to do any, sell your company. So it's kind of like, the same thing where I've had people say that to me, where I used to dabble in this, and I had somebody come up to me before and say, well, I could just get my kid to do this. And it happened, and I said, well, best of luck to you. And I still gave him some pointers to give to his son. Well, the kid actually ended up calling me up and asking me for help. And he was like, listen, he goes, I've done this and blah, blah, blah. And he's just, just running the gamut of the edit. And he talked about some of the shots that he did, and some of the, some of the stuff he took the audio was terrible, or some of the stuff he took, he didn't, he took out his phone and he just used auto iris and autofocus. And so,
Yeah.
And so what happened was he tried to, being and Danny, being an editor, that old phrase, you have to polish a turd. So he was trying to polish this turd, and he was trying to figure out how to do all this. So he called me, and I said, listen, here's what you do. Tell your dad just to cut me a check, and we'll reshoot this whole thing. And so that was the and it was we actually ended up reshooting the whole thing, and it was still like not the whole thing with the whole subject matter. He told me it was about one thing, and then it was really about another. But that's why I kind of see, and I'm thankful that you guys haven't seen that yet or experienced that, because it's so, it's so redundant to have to keep going over. You know what I mean? Like, well, your kid doesn't do this. You know what I mean? Your kid doesn't have a pro level grade, whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many variables and unknowns, and there's a lot that comes with experience. So it's a nice thing for them to say, but it's just not realistic. It's not that easy.
Yeah, and especially when they don't realize, because all amateurs forget about the audio. That's always the end point of all this.
Yeah,
Right. Exactly.
Yep.
So we talked about you mentioned before about the Pretender. I wanted to get into that. How did you guys end up getting involved with the project?
Well, I met Mike just by chance on the set of Rocky Balboa, which is Rocky 6, right? So I met Mike there. I never knew anything about him. I met him there, and everyone was just kind of gravitating towards him because he looked a little bit like Sly. He sounded a little bit like Sly, and I just was one of those people that kind of gravitated towards him, hung out with him for a couple hours, and then the funny thing was, I was in town in Philly for the week, and he was on the local news like every night, where they did those like local, Stallone's back in Philadelphia filming Rocky, and no one's happier than a local Mike Kunda. And this happened every night, and he was like etched in my brain. So I kind of just kept up with him for a couple of years online, and then he wrote a book about his life called Cue the Rocky Music. And I always thought about doing a little maybe 5-minute video about him. And when the book finally came out, I said, well, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and do this before someone else does, because I thought it was just a cool story. And once I got out there, interviewed him and his parents, I realized, that this needed to be more than just a 5-minute video. Like, this was a kind of a deep and rich story and a fun story. And, honestly, I was a little skeptical, about Mike's level of fandom. I heard all these stories and all that, about I've liked this since I was 10 years old, and it was kind of hard to believe. But once we saw Mike and his house, and there was proof everywhere, that, and you'll see it in the film, that he really was this committed to Rocky and sort of becoming Rocky, and it was a really, really impressive, and it just kind of snowballed after meeting his parents, really, especially his father.
So you were both on the set of Rocky Balboa. So I assume that Mike was probably an extra. So were you working on crew at that point, Jim?
No, I was in a totally different. I was working in advertising, and really hadn't shot anything yet. I was just still sort of dreaming about, shooting documentaries and stuff. And Mike was not an extra either. He was just standing there with a giant painting that he painted, and it was just a super fan there trying to get a glimpse of Stallone. And I actually had the weekend off from my job in Philly, and was just hanging out, and just by chance ran into him and kind of never forgot about him. So it was totally random that I met him.
I've seen photos of Mike. He's somebody you wouldn't forget because he does look like Rocky from Rocky 1.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, the security guards were like, thought he was so cool because he sounded like Sly, and they were getting a kick out of him, and they would give him tips like, stand right here, Sly's coming in an hour, don't move, So I hung out with him because he started to get like the inside scoop on it all.
Yeah, it's funny how if you look and talk a certain way, some people probably may have thought he's even Sly's kid.
Yeah, they start to treat him like that, and I mean, while we were filming, and especially while we're doing the film festivals and going out with Mike, I mean, he comes to Detroit. We were in Jersey City last 2 weeks ago, and like the hotel worker thought he was like, they're not sure. Is this Sly? What the hell is this guy? And the guy said, like, one guy didn't know anything, and he said, "Man, did anyone ever tell you like Sly Stallone?" And he laughed and everything. And one guy, I was chatting him up, and I did say like, "Yeah, I'm doing this I did this documentary, and this impersonator is going to be here." And he saw Mike, and he said, "Man, Jim said you look like Sly, but this is unbelievable, man." And Mike signs autographs and stuff, right? Because he looks so much like him.
Yeah, he really does, and that's why I think this documentary, and I'm hoping to check it out at first glance. Well, when this podcast airs, it's going to be this weekend, so I'm gonna refer to this weekend in Philly. Cool. But yeah, it's such an interesting a topic because it's from Philly, obviously. But it's also incredibly cool how like a movie can touch someone's life. So when Jim, when you got there and you started checking out meeting Mike and meeting his family, and you started like talking about making this documentary, what was Mike's response to this?
He was very enthusiastic about it. He was very enthusiastic about it and very helpful. Like, he was almost like a good producer on this thing because he kind of, there were things that he wanted to cover and he knew that we wanted to cover. He kept us really up to date on like, hey, I got a gig coming up, as an impersonator, you might want to check this out. And there's a scene in the movie where he sends a package to Sylvester Stallone, and he waited to do that until, we were able to come down and meet up with him. So he was very like keen on that. I don't think it, and Danny can speak to this too. It'd be cool to hear what Danny says, but I don't think it turned out the way he expected it would, but I know he likes it, but I don't think it was what he thought it was going to be. Like, what do you think?
Yeah. Like, I think Mike, he almost was playing host a little bit when we were filming him. And so we would kind of separate that stuff out from when we were getting like, natural Mike or like, TV host Mike, And so that was one thing in the edit that we kind of made a rule, and we're like, anytime we get a hint of this, like that he's playing it up a little bit for camera, we didn't include it because it wasn't honest,
Yeah.
By the way, Danny, I like that expression, TV host Mike.
It was. That's true. Yeah, it's true because he says that he I know when we interviewed him and stuff, and the Rocky character, when he kind of slips into it, gives him confidence. He said that. And so we tried to include those rare moments when there was less Rocky and more Mike, Yeah. Because, the camera's on you. Like, I don't blame him. Everyone acts a little different. But when you're like a Rocky super fan or impersonator, you really,
But he's really good with people, and he's really good on camera, So it was helpful in a way, and then in some ways it maybe went a little bit too far, where you have to let's peel back the layers a little bit and see what's really going on.
Yeah, it's so true. When the camera does get on, you kind of change. Everyone, and it happens to everybody. Look at I guess like some of those reality TV shows. Although that's probably a bad example on my part, but you know what I mean. It's kind of like it's funny. I used to have a friend who did reality TV, and he goes they don't even like, they're not abashed anymore. He's like, they just look for the biggest train wrecks they could find, and he's like, they throw them into a room together. And if there's no powder keg itself, he's like, then they'll start feeding them drama or lines or something.
Right.
But you know what I mean. But he's always they're always hoping for just getting in people who have a chip on their shoulder, or they get a little drink in them, and all this, you know what I mean. But
Yeah.
it's so true that people do act differently. But again,
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the best the best example.
Yeah, right. Well, we were talking about it too, like, this really is, and, we were able to really peel it away and get some really natural moments, in this film. And like, we were talking, like, we watched that Lady Gaga documentary recently, and like, it almost seems like you can't make a real documentary about a famous person anymore. They're too guarded,
Right.
Like, they put on like I don't know, where we did with Mike, and I would love to see like I think our dream project would be to like do like Stallone, do it as raw as this, or just somebody, but really like verite, like get them real.
I mean, like, everybody's acting to some degree, and then when you're trying to do something about somebody whose job it is to be a professional actor, it's like, how do you get that?
Yeah.
It
It was fun. It was a fun challenge to shoot at it.
By the way, speaking of the Lady Gaga documentary, I actually had on one of the co-directors. I think she was on the podcast.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It was actually. Oh no, I was going to say it was actually a really cool interview, and she actually touched on what you were saying, because it got to the point where Gaga actually didn't even know that they were still filming. So she's filming one day. She had a camera set up and everything. And Gaga came over and said, we're rehearsing. You can't be here. And she's like, no, Gaga, remember me? She's like, I'm filming this documentary about you. And she goes, oh, yeah, you. Oh, I forgot. Yeah, okay.
Oh, how funny. How funny. Yeah, that is interesting. I'd like to hear more about their process. I'll have to go back and listen to that one.
Yeah, and I'll link to that in the show notes, everybody, too. Really, really cool interview for the podcast. I've been very fortunate, Jim, to have like some really cool people on here. And just to continue about the Pretender.
Yeah.
What were some of the biggest obstacles in filming? Like some of the some of those days where you get to set, or in your case, you go to film Mike and his daily life, and something completely unexpected happens that kind of just throws everything in disarray. So what were some of the biggest challenges or obstacles you faced when you were making the film?
Well, I think like what you just said about how sometimes just you show up and you're throwing a curveball, that was the most fun. Like those are all like, those moments are all in the film. Like whenever like these really surprise moments would happen, that was the most fun to shoot, and it was the most interesting to like include. And there's some moments in the film where like some things happen that no one saw coming, and they were those moments were very revealing about Mike and about the subject matter, and how tough things can be. It had a lot of drama when there was a curveball thrown. I think the hardest parts, the most frustrating parts, were like what Danny said, when it felt more scripted, and it was almost like Mike was too prepared, and it felt a little scripted. And that, especially my first day shooting him, we actually filmed Larry Holmes, and Mike. I don't think we were still trying to figure out how this would go, like how we would shoot this documentary, and Mike kind of led that interview and hosted it, and it didn't even make it into the film because it was a little I don't know, unnatural. It was a little I don't know, how would you say, what was it? A little like off topic.
Yeah, I think Mike maybe, because he had probably had like an agenda of what he wanted to talk about, or what but really it's about him.
Yeah.
So when he kind of flipped it like that, you'd have to figure out a way to get it back on track, where it was really about Mike. He would be ready, right? I mean, he'd be ready, like questions for Larry Holmes and questions for
Yeah.
So
and another thing that we learned, and that was tough, was talking to other people or interviewing other people while Mike was around. That was kind of tough, like, because I felt like they didn't want to praise him too much, or they didn't want to be too critical of him while he was there. So that was one thing that we learned right away, to kind of, like, all right, Mike, we're going to interview this person. You can kind of hang back. So that there was a little learning curve there too. But but it was fun, man. I mean, it was fun. Like, anything that was besides that, like when it got too scripty, that was a little tough, but any curveballs or anything besides that was just awesome. I mean, it was just adrenaline.
And even just going through all the footage, like the amount of energy that Mike has, it was like contagious. Like he had so much drive and passion for Rocky that you'd be editing it and I'd get so sucked into just like watching him, be so excited about meeting Larry Holmes or doing this or doing that. So that was a really cool.
Yeah.
When you mentioned Larry Holmes appearing, I just then thought Mike went to TV host Mike, like Danny said, and he just kind of opens the door and goes, "Oh, Larry Holmes stopped by. What a shock."
No, yeah, right. I didn't see you there. Welcome. Yeah. Yeah. That's just, yeah.
You're like, "Oh, Larry, you stopped by suddenly. I didn't expect to see you." It's like,
correct. I know. Yeah, it was my first day too, so it was a little, we were getting to know each other, and it was still like, I don't know, it's like I said earlier, it was just amazing that this was all real, that Mike was this committed and passionate about this character. It was shocking. It took a minute to like absorb it all, and like, there was he talked about how he saw Rocky 3 the summer it came out like 60 something times.
Yeah.
And then you're like, yeah, okay, that's exaggerated. But he had like the tally marks, like in his house, where every time he saw it, he would knock off a tally mark, and there it was, proof he saw it 60 something times. And there's many other examples like that where they're in the film, and like you can't deny the level of passion that this guy had for him.
Yeah, and that's why I think this documentary, I think it's not even just it's funny, but I also think it's such a great story about a guy who's so touched by this character, you know what I mean? And I kind of get that from the trailer. Again, I haven't seen it yet, but I kind of get that from the trailer that this is like a really good story, you know what I mean, about just this guy growing up in Philly who's very touched by a character who is also representing Philly.
Yeah, and it's like, hey, it's a goofy premise. It could be considered a goofy premise, Rocky, but Danny and I, and of course Mike, like, we took it serious. We treated it very serious. Number one, it's this guy's life, and it's his family, and they're all involved in it's his real life. And second of all, it makes a better film to take it serious. Within this subculture or passion for Rocky or whatever, nothing is, there's jokes in here, there's funny moments, but everything is taken serious. It's gone through a filter of a real story, and hopefully a heartfelt story and an honest story. So that was something that we didn't really even have to discuss. We did say it out loud, but it was something that was very obvious that it's serious. It's a serious topic, which sounds crazy, but someone's life is a serious topic,
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It kind of reminds me too of some of the other documentaries that have come out in recent years. What was it called? Searching for Sugarman, I think. That was it. I don't know if you guys have saw that doc. But there's a couple of documentaries I've seen over the past couple of years where the more the more interesting it is. You want to see what this doc's really about. Because there's always that the two layers. There's a surface level what something's about, and there's what it's really about, and then you start getting in there and you're realizing that a lot of this is this is serious because it is people's lives, people's their comings and goings, and in this case it was about this guy just living his life.
Yeah, absolutely. And Searching for Sugarman, that was Detroit. That was shot in Detroit.
See, look at that callback. Look at that.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. And clothes. No, I'm just kidding.
I'm going to link to the trailer, everybody, in the show notes. And again, you can see this at the FirstGlance Film Festival, which is coming up here in Philadelphia. Do you know what time it's playing off the top of your head, Jim? Because I don't.
Yeah, Sunday at 2:00.
And I'm going to be linking to that, everybody, in the show notes. And FirstGlance Film Festival is always a pretty good festival here in Philadelphia. It's and it's always does well. And like I was saying to Jim and Danny before, last year I had on 3 Philadelphia filmmakers, and now I'm glad to be able to keep a relationship with the festival, and being able to talk to awesome people like you, Danny, and you, Jim. And it's just really cool. It's really really cool to be able to meet different people out there actually doing stuff. So that's the whole reason I started this podcast was no real theoretical, only like actual stuff. You know what I mean? Like people actually out there doing it, getting their hands dirty. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I mean that's like Andy said earlier. That's what Mike did for us, man. Like he went for his dreams and followed his passion, and Danny got cranked on this thing that nobody asked for, and we're super proud. Number one, that it's done, it's finished, and out there, and number two, it's really good.
And just as sort of to sort of put a period at the end of this whole conversation, Danny and Jim, do you have any sort of parting thoughts or anything you want to say to sort of put a period at the end of this whole conversation?
I'll go, and then Danny can go, but I would just say, this film is for, Rocky fans, and it's also for non-Rocky fans. I think it's just hopefully a universal underdog story that everybody can relate to. And the biggest thing, like I said, it might be a goofy premise, but I think our hearts are in this, and Mike's is, and I hope that everyone has a chance to check it out.
Danny, do you want to put any...
Yeah, I would second that. I don't know if I have anything. That's pretty much my thoughts exactly.
So where can people find the both of you online? Do you have any social media or any sites?
Yeah, so the pretendermovie.com is kind of our home base there. The Pretender Movies on Instagram, Facebook, and the name of our production company is Free Age, and the website to that is freeageproductions.com.
And again, everyone...
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, Jim. I just stepped on your line. Sorry about that.
No, I was just going to say, but if people want to follow the Pretender Movies, the most updated is probably our Instagram account.
Yeah, Instagram has become, slowly become my favorite social media site. A lot of really cool stuff, you can get done on there. And not a lot of the ads and stuff like the other ones, for the time being. but everyone, yeah. I'm going to link to all that, everybody, in the show notes at davebullis.com. Twitter, it's at DB Podcast, and at Instagram, it's the Dave Bullis Podcast. I'm pretty active on those. And again, everyone, thank you for sharing the podcast. It really helps out everybody. It helps out Jim and Danny too. But guys, I want to say thank you so much for coming on.
Cool. Thank you. Thanks for having us, buddy.
Find Dave at davebullis.com. Please make sure to subscribe and share the podcast.